Geoff, Geoff Fitch, so good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Thomas.
Thank you for coming back on Radio Wolf. It's been a time. And the last time, which is a couple of years ago, we talked about space work, something that we both are passionate about. And what to say, the world has changed since in many ways. And as we are both rooted in our life work, deeply also in integral work, whatever this means. But we also, both of us, developed our own version of working this. But we are, how to say, both very much interested in the world as such, in people, consciousness, and spirit, and how this goes together. And as we are living in difficult times, I thought to talk with you in this work of consciousness, integral engagement, conscious living. Where are we going? What's your reflection of how we as humanity, how we as practitioners, how is the world going, and where should we go?
That's a very big question.
Yeah.
Where should the world go? Is the only honest answer I could give that big question is I don't know. But I want that's not fully honest because I have thoughts and feelings about it. But thank you for the conversation. I really appreciate it. Just to touch on integral, since you mentioned that, it's been a foundational kind of orientation of our work. Something that's Wilber's work has influenced us and inspired us. We've been engaged in this work for the past 20 years or so, and that was in a way kind of starting an important starting point for us. And I think in a way over that time, we've evolved to include other perspectives. And I think that also kind of represents something about what's emerging in this larger ecosystem of work that engages our emergence, development, growth, that you see a kind of, if we were to use a kind of meta perspective, Sean Hargens originally developed this kind of meta integral theory that Wilber's work with Roy Bhaskar and Edgar Morin, and it was a kind of theoretical way of doing that, but actually the world is doing that without our help. There's communities and ecologies that are weaving together emergent approaches to our own development that you could say include some of the qualities of the integral perspective, even if they don't include the theoretical framework, which I would say, one of the things just to keep in mind whenever we talk about this is that if we use a word like integral, if we use any word, it comes with some, dressing, baggage, meaning making that we bring to it. And integral itself could be seen as, Wilber's theory, it could be seen as a culture that emerged in a certain time, a community of people who came together to make sense of the world. And it can be seen as a kind of, you could say, ethical orientation, an impulse to include and integrate. And I think that last orientation is the part that's deepened and stayed with us the most, which is a sensibility which came down to this sort of pithy statement that Ken made at some point of like, nobody's wrong all of the time, this kind of orientation that we're all bringing something, and how can we make sense of that and integrate it? And now I think that's happening at a larger and more complex scale in many different places of practice, which is healthy. We can avoid some of the ordinary human pitfalls, like, circling our wagons and marrying ideologies and those sorts of things. If we learn from each other and learn across our ecological boundaries, then we can grow together.
I mean, when I look at what I experienced, the integral sentiment from the start, at least what attracted me and what I saw, what attracted many, is a new way to relate to spirit in a way that appreciates the findings of modern, also scientific and rational culture in a way, and finds a shared language. That's one part what I see. This is this integral sentiment that happened. There's something that happened before. There was a birth of spirituality already in the 70s with hippies and New Age and all. There were different birthing forms, but that particular integral brand of this, the way I see it, correct me, was this this longing to find together an Western form of enlightened understanding of reality that really appreciates also the Western Enlightenment, science, philosophy, in that, but has a deep connection to the sacred, to use a different word. That's one part. And then something that more came in the middle but became very dominant is a self-recognition of our postmodern reality and the need to move on. I still remember when the mean green meme thing happened, and there was a lot of pain of people, me included, who did not want to kind of re-look into the shadow sides of our postmodern culture that we have created in that, and the question, what would a higher form of integration bring? And this sentiment, I think, is still alive. And when I think about integral, if it may be Wilberian integral or other brands of integral, metamodern for me is just another brand of integral in that sense, and that's still valid and alive.
It's one of the paradoxes, I think, in that work, was that on the one hand there was this impulse to really embrace the whole. There's a kind of like the theory of everything, the inclusion dimension, and then the paradox was that Wilber's work was also a kind of polemic against postmodernism, which created contradictions. Frankly, it created it created a kind of, I think a kind of obscuring of the good qualities of postmodernism, and it created a kind of obscuring of the shadows of the developmental impulse at the time. But I think that's working its way out, and people are seeing that and integrating that, and it's part of. It's like our evolutionary process is chaotic, it's dialectical, it's everything that gets kind of put into the process as a way of creating tensions, but also working through that as we learn and grow. But that impulse, that impulse to bring together, modernism and science and spirituality was what first attracted me to it. The first book that I read was The Marriage of Sense and Soul, and which was, for those who haven't read it, it's a book that kind of looks at science and spirituality and says like, oh, these aren't at war with each other. They're two domains, you know, and if we recognize where they situate, we can let them coexist. And you know, as someone who was like had a kind of deep interest in spirituality and who had a father who was a physician and a very rationalist kind of atheist agnostic person. I read that book and I thought, oh, here's the way to have this argument with my father, you know, and it was very personal and very very real for me, you know, in that kind of way. And but it's just the start of some, you know, something deeper and more broad and you know, part of our evolutionary journey here in our work.
Maybe to share something, I think that fits here. I met Ken Wilber, his thoughts, in a bookstore in Vienna, Austria, in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was studying philosophy in Vienna. I had a very strong left-leaning political Marxist backgrounding, but started to do a lot of therapy. And this therapeutic kind of practice cracked open a lot of my Marxist thinking, let's put it that way. And I was looking around and Freud and Jung and Reich, but also spiritual New Age literature. In particular, the spiritual literature, on one hand, something attracted me there because there was something speaking, but I really hated it because I felt this, sorry, my philosophical arrogance, people can't think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to encounter just by chance the early Ken Wilber, and I found such a relief that someone can think. And honor the subtle inner dimensions of reality. And that was for me an initiation experience that was very important for me, and that allowed me to also move beyond just my version of postmodern political, psychological, psychotherapeutic identity. And that was very important. And at the same time, over the years and years, this very thing that attracted me in the first place became a huge obstacle. This theory of everything. And I'm talking many years, and also maturing in my own way, being in my own spiritual practice, and also observing other people kind of coming into this integral movement, particular very intelligent young men being, and this is just my observation, completely absorbed by the fascination to have a theory of everything and have a mental model for whatever. And in my way, getting lost there. So it's just my personal observations, maybe true or not, that a whole generation of sometimes really good people got lost in this mental attempt to kind of find the right actual place and the cosmic address for everything. And there's something where this was for me also where the integral movement started to lose its momentum. And there's something where post-integral opened up. Also, with it and maybe related to it, that all of a sudden different forms of spirituality, less kind of Indian-oriented meditation or Tibetan, more also South American, African shamanism became something that became important. So something happened there that I think was part and related to the development of integral. Did you experience it similar?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I would say from the beginning of our work, we had some interest and engagement with that kind of the theoretical dimensions, but we're always interested more in like, well, how does this actually, how do we live this? How do we actually practice this? How does this influence us as people? And I'm just using integral as an example. There's other influences on our work beyond the integral frame. For example, the work of Otto Scharmer has been a really strong influence. But always like not how do we become aligned in some sort of orthodoxy, but how does this impact us, our own evolution, which is unfolding, and so the theory has always been a bit in the background with us, and more in the foreground has been practice, and I'm just saying that to say that, like, as these things come into existence, two things tend to happen. One is they tend to highlight what's absenced by them. The Wilber included the lower quadrants, but in the culture and in the practice of integral, the collective dimension wasn't as strong as the focus on spirituality and psychology, for example. And so that it eventually needed to be complemented by this interest in we space and collective emergence and collective intelligence that sprung up out, in some of these communities, but outside of the frame of integral. So one thing that happens is that what comes forth brings with it what it absences and misses. And the other thing that I would say happens is there's a natural movement of things reaching fruition. If you look at your own life, there's movements of things reaching fruition and fullness, and then starting to fall apart, like the seasons. So if we'll bring in another kind of progression, which might be more looking at the cycles of time, and that there's a natural thing of that enactment of integral in the theory, and the people who are attracted to the philosophy and the intellectual approach reaches its zenith, and hopefully autumn comes, and the leaves turn brown, and something else emerges that's more whole. So to me, that's a very natural thing, and I saw something very similar to what you're describing, just in terms of for a while, for example, integral as a movement, and we could be talking about any movement, had a more kind of top-down organization, which sort of went through its life, and then it was more a kind of ecological springing of different ideas in different places. And that and now, like recently, Nomali has been talking about how do we organize and bring it together again. So these movements have these kind of natural cycles of and hopefully of evolution, even if for a while we reify something and think we've arrived, eventually that will bite us.
When you envision this evolution that you're talking about right now in our shared life, if I may say so, and so these processes that we went through in different parts of the world, in Central Europe and in West Coast America, but already very, very interconnected. They are also the early days of the internet that brought us together in a way. Earlier generations were maybe not so directly linked with each other in that way. Or what grabbed you most in this sense that that you think this is really where I feel the central movement of evolution is going, or evolution of consciousness, of culture, where you think this is, how to say it, the thing that really counts when we talk about our development as culture, our development as humans.
Well, I don't know if this is the thing. I tend to be, I know there are those who enjoy grand narratives, but I tend to be somewhat skeptical of them. This is where we are and this is where we're going. So, but I can tell you where I hope we go. I hope that we go towards a recognition of our essential unity, and that includes our difference. Includes our difference as a field of creativity and pleasure and novelty. I'm concerned now by, and I'm sure that this is just an evolutionary process, but I'm concerned by the way in which, as human beings, we become divided. And maybe I'm not saying anything novel here or new, but I think at the heart of a lot of the work that we're involved with, what I see and this is the way I actually kind of conceive of the work now, is that there's sort of an innate intelligence. I'm touching the heart. I feel like there's an innate intelligence, which you might say is situated in the heart, not in the emotional heart, but in our kind of unit of consciousness, both individually and collectively, that recognizes the emergence of a more healthy and whole being, future. And what I see in the work that we do over and over again is that landing in a place that recognizes our profound unity, not at the expense of our diversity, is recognized, is experienced joyously, is experienced as a place of potential and hope. And this is where I hope we go, because I think from that place, then we can really just start to clean up the mess that we've made and build something that's more elegant as a human society. But maybe this is idealistic, but this is the potential that I see in the work that we're doing.
Interesting listening to you, because one thing that most strikes me is the way you talk about it. What I mean with that is the embodiment of your sentiment. I mean, there's a direct way of I mean, the way you touched your own heart in talking, that feels relevant to me in that sense that our culture, and I have to admit, I still think a lot in big narratives.
It's okay.
They are important for me, but there is something in our Western European cultural history of the development of our consciousness, where this embodiment became part of our development in some way, and that there's a lot of positive things, but where a lot of what is happening right now, and particular the climate catastrophe, is kind of really forcing us to deal with the embodied reality that we are, and not just meaning the individual embodiment, but also our collective and global planetary embodiment, and where and this is something that became important to me, not in the sense of romantic regression, but in honoring of indigenous wisdom who have not gone in the same way through our particular form of individuation processes and mental kind of mental culture processes that our European American culture is great enough, that I feel we have a lot to learn, and we need to learn in order to be able to respond to something that's very obviously dramatically calling us to respond. I'm talking about the climate crisis itself. And this in holds, and also this is a big narrative. The crisis of 500 years of Western white civilization. And I'm very aware that there are problematic sides to woke culture, but it's important at the same time.
Yeah.
And to honor this, we have to find ways to reconnect to our indigeneity, and also everything that woke culture is pointing, where we having huge blind spots in the way we perceive reality.
Yeah.
It seems that this also became part of the conversation, necessarily so.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think so in a sense, when I'm speaking of unity in diversity, I'm including, like, we have, all of us need to learn from each other in this moment, and to confront the situation that we're in. But I want to come back to the point you said about climate change and embodiment. So what I noticed when you started to speak about that is I started to feel some anxiety when you started to speak about the climate crisis. And so to actually find ourselves in that place of integration as a human family. And you can see this from a kind of a Western perspective. Like, I'm speaking about something that may be as much about healing the Western mind as, the Northern mind, as much as anything. But I think it's true for all of us, because we're all to some degree infused with all of these cultures and at the effect of them. We can't address the climate crisis if we're in isolation and fear and afraid of each other.
Mm.
And to speak to the embodiment dimension, where you go when you're in that place is out of your body. So, and this is, this kind of finding ourselves in our body and nature is like obviously a gift of that we receive from our own, as you said, from our own indigeneity, from returning to the earth, to our own ground. But it's also important for us to come together, because even as we come together in a we space, cultivated to enter into these deeper territories and to foster capacities and practices for emergence, all of this is still with us. People come into the room a little bit wary of each other, not knowing who each other is, and so, or wary of each other's cultures, perspectives, ideas. So to me, this is all about coming home. And I might use kind of some simple terminology, but I'm including the complexities that you're speaking to.
It's interesting where you're going, because I resonate with that. Also, out of the security, where is all this going? Talking about climate crisis, talking about the civilizational crisis, talking also about the crisis of the economic system that is very prevalent right now. Again, talking about this unbelievable gruesome war in Europe that is also only bringing it more to my face, because it has been here all along, but now it's in our neighborhood as Europeans. One thing that just stands out for me as being important is creating communities of trust. And what I mean with community of trust is looking for people who hold what I would call, or what I would perceive as integrity, what I would perceive connectedness to our embodiment, our embeddedness in the life process, to people, and also to what I would call the sacred. And also a capacity of, in that sense, at least to some degree, a complex thinking that allows bigger, more complex reality to be part of the picture. And somehow, when I look what I'm looking for, I'm looking of clusters of communities building around this integrity, rootedness, also the complexity of reality, but in the center of all, a relationship in what name ever to the sacred. So that we can find ways to support each other as kind of clusters that have a role to play in the development of the world, even if a lot of things are going down right now.
Yeah. No, I'm right with you in that, Tomas. And kind of one of the central pieces of our work has been the Generating Transformative Change program, and that's really about developing these communities of trust. It's a intimate cohort process where we bring groups of people together and cultivate that capacity, but also not just capacity cultivating, actually supporting the emergence of a very unique form of I mean unique, not in the sense that this work is unique, but that each one of those groups is unique in their own personality, but a unique form of that community of trust. The only thing I would add to those dimensions that you spoke to is enactment, that we're engaged in the world,
Yeah.
that we're seeing the world and we're deepening trust and connecting to the sacred, but then being in this energy to actually bring that into at wherever we're working. It might be in our families or in the world at large, or our communities or organizations, bringing that out into the world. And the one thing I wanted to touch on, which is something that's important to me in our work as we speak about we spaces, is the word community. Just to rest on that a moment, because in our we space work, like the beauty of that work is that it's brought an understanding of how to cultivate a kind of space, a kind of field for our own emergence, for the collective emergence, for our own growth, for touching into deeper trust. And that's one kind of a more subtle level of community. The more embodied or concrete level of community is the real relationships between people. Sometimes we can come into a we space and fall in love with somebody, but we don't know if we know their name or not, or what they do for a living, or what's going on in their lives. And so part of what we've seen is like to really support the cultivation of that, what we sort of call concrete level of community, of actually real relationships. It's really, in my view, important for our future that we not just cultivate the capacity to develop trust with each other, but that we get involved in each other's lives, in these communities, and that we show up, that we're committed to each other, that we go to the levels where we surface, the emotional difference and conflict, and we create that kind of engagement with each other, which I think is a little bit missing, both from the, you can look at it from the kind of Western indigenous split that you're describing, or this sort of modern virtual reality that we're living in, that we need to find each other in relationship again. So that's my little pitch for for communities. Yeah,
that's great, because there's something I see emerging right now that makes me hopeful in this mycelium of a lot of things that are happening right now.
Yeah.
Which is this regenerative culture movement.
Right.
Where, I don't know if you know Daniel Christian Wahl, who is kind of a thinker of this regenerative culture.
I don't.
He wrote a book 10 years ago that I find very impressive. And in a conversation with him, he showed me something that really became important to me, because in the way he was talking about regenerative cultures, it's always important for him to have it in plural, not in singular, is that it is always embedded in bioregions, in real relationships.
Yeah.
Real relationships are relationships that have workable feedback loops to each other, where basically what I talk to you has the chance to come back to me, and in that, and not only in the human sphere, but also in the modern human sphere. That's bioregion, where basically the place we live, the landscape that we live, and the plant and animal life where we live, where this becomes a wholeness very much also inspired by the permaculture idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is making that we don't see each other as people working in this bioregion, but we are the conscious expression of it, which really changes our human subjectivity sense. I am the individual working in my bioregion, something. No, we as a whole, and that's is then a deeper or broader understanding of the we space, become a conscious expression of that. And then see, so this is something where I feel, wow, this is very powerful and important.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of that movement, and I think it's an expression of exactly what what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about like actually embedding ourselves in a real relationship. And I think that's an enactment of it. I think also we can't escape the wider virtual global world that we're in. And in that too, we can also cultivate real relationships. But I love that. We've been, just not to go down another tangent, but part of my work has been also to engage with work in technology. And there's another organization that I'm part of called the Human Data Commons, which is looking at the synthesis of technology, consciousness, and ethics. And we've also been working with an organization called the Terran Collective, which is doing this kind of bioregional work and building a social platform called Hilo, which is oriented towards cultivating bioregional local community. So one of the things that it has on it, which you don't find in a social platform, is a map of where everybody that you're talking to lives, or a map of who all is in your area, or what things are happening in your area, or even what resources are in your area, And so there's this kind of impulse to, and of course in our area too, we live in a bioregion that crosses. I live in the Seattle area, northwest of the United States. Most of what animates our life here, it transcends the U.S.-Canadian border. It's really a bioregional life that we live in here. And my parents were both born in Canada, and my sister just went up to the islands in British Columbia to witness what they call the herring run, which is when all the herring fish come back to the area and there's a feeding frenzy. And this is really the life of this area, the weather and all of that. And this is, I think, in our modern world, we have gotten really disconnected from that. Most of my relationships are in this metaverse. Right. So we're trying to find ourselves back to our roots.
But I find it very fascinating that you immediately went into this technological sphere, because that's exactly where I wanted to go with this also. Because there is something interesting, and I learned from a movement that is very active in Europe. It's called Regions Unite, very young movement, people who are very much into this bioregional, but they are in the same way very engaged in Web3 technology.
Yeah.
In crypto, DAOs, and all that. And I mean, to the degree that I can grasp what this is about, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that still have to work itself out, but there is also the tendency to be able, with the capacity of Web3 new technology, to create autonomous spaces in the technosphere that also allows to create kind of a bioregion in that global sphere that can be connected through us, through the earth sphere that we are living to. And when I kind of grasp that there's this movement where people were really connecting to earth in this way, and the social way you're describing this way, but also trying to hold this, not being technophobic, but basically transform technology in a way that can hold this.
Yeah.
It gave me, wow, this is interesting, because the term noosphere that also came from Tyler Desjardins and this kind of thing, it became alive in me in a new way, where I also see that these are maybe new forms of human of rootedness in our humanity, rootedness in our spirit, and being with each other on this globe, can find new ways how we can do this. So that there are things in spite of everything that's going down, where I really find traces of possible futures in this.
Yeah, it's beautiful. No, I'm very much interested and inspired by that too, in a way to come back to this theme of wholeness and, as you put it, the sacred, which both kind of reveals the essential beauty or goodness of our world, but also is a doorway to our unification, you know, our synthesis, our re-encountering each other. There's a doorway to that which is more from the inner, you know, from one's own evolution. There's a doorway to that which is really in our we space. And you can also look at the sort of societal structures or power dynamics, technology, and say, well, okay, that's dividing us, you know, and we need to address something about that to create a more systemic structure that allows us to more come together. And so some of the movements that you're talking about, which, you know, some of them have a kind of anarchist flavor, you know, they're, to me, they're responses to that, seeing, oh, like, you know, the systemic structures, the government structures, the technology structures are creating divisions. And if we can find a way to end run that and create other structures that allow us to emerge communities together spontaneously, then that is also, to me, another expression of that, coming back to the sacred, coming back to the ground, back to our wholeness. And zooming out from all of that, you know, these are like, you know, you used the term earlier, ecology is a practice when we were talking, and ecology is something that's emergent, you know, and these different movements come together and bump up against each other and influence each other. And to me, you know, this is just why, you know, I don't avoid grand narratives, but maybe enjoy multiple potential grand narratives because there's just such complexity, you know, and it's part of the beauty, and what really ultimately gives me hope is that there is a kind of, you know, garden of emergence of these different approaches and movements to address and to cultivate a more, you know, beneficial future for us.
Yes, we are also quite over time.
Are we? Okay.
Yeah, but I didn't want to stop it. But let me use this. Maybe it's, I think, a good place to land also.
Yeah.
Geoff, it was a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And do you mind if I make one short pitch for something that's coming up in our work? Yeah. Yeah, just to mention a few things, if folks are interested in engaging with us, our work has been mostly situated in North America and Asia Pacific and Australia and New Zealand, and we've also done some work in East Africa. But we're kind of cultivating connections in Europe now, and we're going to be at the Integral Conference in Europe and do a workshop there. But we also have a short seminar series called Cultivating Emergence, which we're going to offer starting on April 11th, and that'll be in a European friendly time zone. And then there's a number of other things coming up. We can give you links and maybe you can post those just so that people know where to find us.
I will put a link also in the email for this radio.
Great,
so
great. Yeah. So just wanted to mention that because it's coming up. But, having said that, I just really appreciate it. It's so fun to reconnect with you and to talk and to engage in these topics. Thank you.